Hello, and welcome to worship with Bethel International United Methodist Church. My name is Guy Shawkins.
And my name is Dale Ray, and we are so glad that you're here to worship with us today, wherever you may be.
If you would like to reach out to the church, you can do so on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or by visiting our at mybethel.org.
Today we begin the holy season of Advent, 4 weeks of waiting and preparing for the coming of Christ. We wait in hope.
We begin with the lighting of the Advent candle. Hear the words of the prophet Isaiah.
A voice cries out, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God."
Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill will be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain.
Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all the people shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Today we light the candle of hope.
Hey, it's great to see you. I love Christmas, do you? I thought that you might. There are so many things about Christmas I love. Watching Christmas movies, singing Christmas carols, baking, shopping, giving presents, getting presents, opening presents. So many fun things. But I feel like there's something I forgot. Let me see. I covered some really important things, right? Like presents and cooking and baking and decorating. Oh, I did forget something. I forgot something big. The biggest something. I can't believe I did that. The reason we celebrate Christmas in the first place. The birth of Jesus. How did I forget that? But you know, that's what happens. Sometimes we get caught up in all these preparations that we do forget the reason we're doing this. We forget to keep Jesus as the center and as the focus of our time at Christmas. Does Jesus really care if we have twinkly lights on our tree or a wreath on our door? No. Those are great, but we can't let all of our preparations make us forget the most important reason and why we're doing this all. The birth of Jesus. So I came up with an idea to help us keep our focus on Jesus this time during Advent. For some, Christmas is not a happy time. They might be lonely or missing friends or family, and it might just be a stressful, sad time. And let's face it, 2020 has been rough for all of us, hasn't it? Yeah. And I've told you time and time again that God is with us no matter what, when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're lonely. But what if during this time of Advent, each week, we chose at least one person to remind them of how much God loves them? They could be by sending them a note, or dropping cookies on their door, or just reaching out to them in some way. It doesn't have to be big. But what if we became the light of Christ for someone else? Wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah. I think that's what it's all about. I hope you have a great week, friends. I'll see you soon.
Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 23. Now after the wise men had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to reach for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophets. "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then he fulfilled what he had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. Rachel, weeping for her children, she refused to be consoled, because they were no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. And then he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea, in place of his father Herod. He was afraid to go there, and after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will call it Nazarene.
For a little bit of hope, oh come, oh So a couple years ago in December, our worship theme was Home for Christmas. I wanted to invite home to Bethel International Church anybody who kind of wandered away. I wanted to invite home to Jesus, anyone whose faith may have faltered. Home for Christmas. Well, we're returning to that theme this year, but it feels different now, doesn't it? This year, some people won't be able to be home for Christmas. Some people will be home alone for Christmas. This year, Advent, our season of preparation for Christmas, well, it feels sort of dark and uncertain, which actually is the way that Advent is supposed to feel. I know that TV ads and the culture begin celebrating Christmas when? Maybe early October, but not the church. The church is just now finally entering into Advent, which is not yet a time for celebration. Advent is a time for expectant waiting. Advent is a season of candle-lit longing. It is a time to hope our hopes that once again the light of Christ may yet shine in our darkness. So this Advent, Home for Christmas, what we're looking at is not whether or not we will be home for Christmas, but we are looking at where Jesus will be home for Christmas. And each of the four Gospels gives a kind of different answer to that question. Luke has the familiar stable or barn next to the inn where Jesus was born. John has Jesus camping out, pitching a tent right in our backyard. Mark has Jesus go to the river for a Christmas baptism. And then there's Matthew. Matthew, well, he's the somber one. Matthew adds some unfamiliar figures to our usually cheerful manger scene. There is that gloomy prophet Jeremiah that we just heard from. There is Rachel, symbolically the mother of all of Israel, weeping for her lost children. And there's even King Herod stalking Jesus and killing babies. And then Matthew follows the Holy Family, Mary and Joseph and Jesus, as they have to run for their lives out of Israel. They apply for asylum in Egypt. And Matthew says that Jesus' first home for Christmas was a refugee camp in a foreign land. So Matthew's Christmas story, well, it includes dying children. It includes a maniacal tyrant. It includes Jesus as a refugee. It's not our usual sentimental Christmas story, right? It might be enough that you'd even say, well, I don't know if we even want to pay attention to Matthew's Christmas story. Why is it important to remember King Herod and that Jesus was a refugee? Well, because, of course, we too live in a world of violent leaders. We too live in a world of displaced persons. Amnesty International reports that the world currently has 26 million refugees, and half of those are children. Refugees get crammed into seemingly endlessly overcrowded camps in places like Jordan and Sudan. Refugees try to cross by sea from Africa into Europe, and many of them are drowned in the Mediterranean. And refugee children have been forcefully removed from their own parents on our own country's southern border. That's what life is often like for refugees. And I know most of us don't have stories like that, but we've all got our share of stress and strain. Everybody has lost loved ones. Over 30 years of ministry, I can't tell you how many funerals I've done within just a few days of Christmas. And then there's this year, right? This year, we are just sort of dragging ourselves. We're just sort of limping along on our way to Christmas. This year, children are somehow trying to learn at home, and parents are somehow trying to help children learn at home while they work at home or they go off to work. That is, if they're lucky enough to still have work. This year, we're trying to recover from the most divisive political time of my entire life. This year, well, this year is the year that we need Matthew's Christmas story. In just a few verses from Matthew, he hammers home 3 times that all of this happened, that everything in his story happened in order to fulfill prophecy. Jesus' family fleeing into Egypt and then finally returning to Israel, that fulfills what Hosea said out of Egypt. I have called my son. Herod killing the babies fulfills the words of the prophet Jeremiah, Rachel weeping for her children. And when the Holy Family finally returned to Israel, they were still too afraid to go back home to Bethlehem. So it says they settled instead in Nazareth, which also fulfilled a prophecy. Now, there are 2 different ways of understanding what it means that these events fulfilled God's prophecies. You could think that God willed all of this tragedy and suffering to happen, that God wanted Jesus to be a refugee, that God made all of those children die in order to fulfill some plan of God. You know, for one, I can't believe that. And I think that the Greek in the New Testament is careful not to say that. Instead, the point, I think, is that even when tragedy comes, even when children suffer, God is still at work. Even when God's own son is a refugee in Egypt, God is still at work trying to bring God's plans to fruition. It's not that tragedy is God's will. It's that even when tragedy happens, God will still find a way to work out God's saving plan. When I was a student chaplain, way back in my seminary years, one time I walked into a hospital room and encountered a 30-something woman. She was just skin and bones. She had only a few days left to live after years of active alcoholism. She was leaving behind 2 young children who were probably going to become wards of the state and enter into foster care. She was separated from almost all of her family members because of the life that alcohol had caused her to live. She was ashamed, she was afraid, she was bitter, she was alone, and I knew that as the chaplain, as the representative of God, I was supposed to talk to her about her soul. I was supposed to offer her faith or forgiveness. I was supposed to pray for her. But I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to pray for somebody whose life was so tragic. And I just felt overwhelmed and unable to cope. So after just a few minutes, I mumbled some excuse and I made my way out of the room. And I went and found our supervisor, the real chaplain, and I told him about this woman's situation and how I felt, and I asked him, what should I do? And I still remember what he said to me. He asked me, Glenn, is your Jesus big enough for that woman? Is your Jesus big enough for that woman? Had to stop and think for a little bit, and finally I said, well, I think he is. And he said, well, then you know what to do, don't you? And I went back into that woman's room, and we talked, and we cried, and both of us prayed. You see, we need Matthew's Christmas story because we need to know that our Jesus is big enough for the hardest places and the hardest times on earth. You see, Matthew is saying that Christmas is also for parents who have lost children. He's saying that Christmas is also for families who are living in refugee camps. He's saying that Christmas is also for people who, even when they finally make their way home, they still don't feel safe. Christmas is for everybody, no matter what their life is like. So yes, Matthew's, it's the somber Christmas story, but I'm here to tell you that Matthew's is also a hopeful story. Here is what hope looks like in Matthew, and I might add, here is what hope looks like for a COVID Christmas. First of all, this, Matthew is assuring us that this too shall pass, right? This too shall pass. Now, I don't say that glibly. Real babies really died in Bethlehem in Jesus' time. Mary and Joseph and Jesus must really have been traumatized by their flight into Egypt. And the suffering and loss in these last 8 months is real too, right? Real people have lost jobs and income. Real people are trying to figure out how to study. Over 250,000 of our fellow citizens have died. All of that is real. But Matthew is saying King Herod did not live forever. And he's saying that Jesus did not stay forever in exile. But he came home to Nazareth, and from there he went on to the cross. And from there he rose up from the tomb, and from there he has come into all of our lives. He's saying that this COVID time will not last forever. This too shall pass. And then this, I think this is really even deeper. Matthew is saying that God is working out God's sacred will in every place, in every time. Even in the tragedy of Bethlehem, God was there comforting those grieving mothers. Even when Jesus was in Egypt, God was there somehow bringing prophecies to fulfillment. God is in every place, and that God is present no matter what home is like, no matter where home is. And I am here to tell you that God is in this COVID crisis too. And God will work out God's holy plan. And God will get God's people to the next place that we need to be. So, in Matthew, Jesus' first home for Christmas is a refugee camp, which means there isn't anywhere we can go that God doesn't go with us. There isn't any story we can tell that God won't finally bring to a better ending. And Advent is the season that we wait for God to get it to that better ending. Advent is the time when we light our candles and we patiently hope that once again the light of Christ will shine in our darkness. And here's my question for you. What shall we do, my friends, while we are waiting for God? What sort of people will we be while we are hoping for the light of Christ?
Sign shall be given, a virgin will conceive, a human baby bearing undiminished deity. The glory of the nations, a light for all to see.
benediction, how about a poem called The Flight into Egypt by Malcolm Gate? We think of him as safe beneath the steeple or cozy in a crib beside the font, but he is with 1 million displaced people on the long road of weariness and want. For even as we sing our final carol, his family is up and on that road, fleeing the wrath of someone else's quarrel, glancing behind and shouldering their load. Whilst Herod rages still from his dark tower, Christ clings to Mary, fingers curled tightly. The lambs are slaughtered by the men of power, and death squads spread their curse across the world. But every Herod dies and comes alone to stand before the Lamb upon the throne.